Hello, and welcome everyone to the Innovations in Tobacco Control Lecture Series. My name is Joanna Cohn. I am the director of the Institute for Global Tobacco Control here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Matt Myers, who is joining me in studio today for a very special lecture to conclude the academic year. Matt Myers is a lawyer who made a career in policy and advocacy with the American Civil Liberties Union, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Coalition on Smoking or Health. Most recently, for 23 years, he served as president and CEO for the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. The Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids has played a critical role in advancing tobacco policy, both nationally and internationally. Matt was also involved in the negotiations that led to the adoption of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Matt Myers has received a number of prestigious awards, including the Research America Award for Outstanding Achievement in Public Health, the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco John Slade Award for outstanding contributions to public health and tobacco control through science-based public policy and public advocacy, the American Cancer Society's Medal of Honor Award, Harvard University's School of Public Health Julius B. Richmond Award, and the prestigious Surgeon General's Medallion for contributions to the public health of the nation. Further, under Mr. Myers' leadership, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids received the esteemed Luther Terry Award for contributions to global tobacco control, and that was 20 years ago. Mr. Myers has an incredible CV for a non-scientist. He has 25 publications in peer-reviewed journals and is first author for many of them. I am fortunate to have co-authored manuscripts with him, and he has always had important, substantive, and insightful comments and suggestions that made papers much stronger. He has also consistently attended and participated in scientific conferences and has never been intimidated by not being a scientist by credential. Rather, he has often had astute questions for speakers that get at the heart of the issues being discussed. Matt is a formidable leader in the fight to reduce tobacco use and its deadly consequences in the US and around the world. I am thrilled that he also now has a faculty position at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health as a senior associate. Today, he is here with us to present a lecture titled The Tobacco Control Movement's Next Act, Challenges Following 2 Decades of Unprecedented Progress. Please join me in welcoming Matt Myers.
Thank you, Joanna. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to have an affiliation with the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, which has become a true global leader. You asked me today to reflect a little bit on my years in working on tobacco control. And what I really want to do is talk about the challenges facing us. But in order to do that, you have to have a sense of where we've come from, how we've gotten to where we are, if we're going to understand about how we take the extraordinary 2 decades of unprecedented progress and make it even better. Let me begin with some reflections from Mike Daub. Mike Daub was the first staff director of the Action on Smoking and Health UK in 1973, truly the first tobacco control organization in the globe. Mike's perception was when he took over 50 years ago, and that's an extraordinary thing, literally in the UK and elsewhere around the globe, smoking was everywhere. The industry was all powerful. The industry still denied the core evidence about the harms of tobacco control. Political figures weren't embarrassed to take tobacco industry money and their advice. The industry science was still seen as credible. Tobacco marketing was literally everywhere, and it framed how people perceive these issues. And we in the public health community really did not have a very good idea about how we were going to change that norm. Mike has shown often a picture to demonstrate what the societal norm was. Here's a picture of the globe's first heart transplant patients coming together to celebrate this extraordinary medical victory. What do you notice? Every one of them has a cigarette in their hand. That is what our society was like. When I looked at the United States, literally 30 years after the first Surgeon General's report in the United States, it wasn't very different. Smoking rates among kids, which had gradually gone down, were now rising and were at the same level that they were in 1975. Smoking rate progress among adults had plateaued at over 25%. And if you were to talk to anybody, the Marlboro Man, the Virginia Slims, and yes, even the Joe Camel cartoon character dominated the image. It wasn't a surprise that 30 years after the first Surgeon General's report, close to 500,000 Americans every year were dying from tobacco use, and the pace of change was glacial. Just as Mike had found 10 years before, there was support for more education, but not really for policies that would make a major change. And if you'll remember, as late as 2006, WHO estimated that while more than 100 million people died prematurely from tobacco use in the 20th century, if then current trends continued, that number would balloon to 1 billion people this century, with the vast majority of them coming from low and middle income countries. 30 years after the Surgeon General's report, 40 years on the global stage, we were really treading water. And we threatened to see in a 21st century far worse than the 20th century. Today, the world looks different. And we need to take a step back and recognize that success and understand how great that success is, what its implications are, but even more importantly, how we got there. So what does the world look like today? Well, let me first take a quick snapshot of the United States. We have gone from over 25% of adults smoking down to just over 11% in the last 25 years. Our progress among kids is even greater. It was over 36% in 1997. Today, that number is hovering at between 1.9 and 2%. If you had asked any of us 25 years ago if we could get youth smoking rates down to that level, we would have said, we'll take it in a moment. How did we get here? Well, the primary impetus from it was action taken at the state and local level. What was it? It was raising cigarette taxes. In 1997, both the federal and state taxes in the United States were extraordinarily low. Look at the progress, and you can measure that progress directly with the reductions in tobacco use that we saw. The same is true with regard to smoke-free air laws. There's probably nothing that drives a reduction in tobacco use more than that. If you go back to 1994, there wasn't a single state in the United States that was 100% smoke-free. Today, 62.7% of Americans live in places with comprehensive smoke-free air laws. 1997, only 3 states in the United States spent even measurable amounts on promoting tobacco policies and promoting public education programs that were comprehensive and focused. Today, that number looks totally different. And if you look at daily smoking, we've made even more progress. In the United States, daily smoking among adults is under 9%. Daily smoking among teenagers, including 12th graders, is now less than 1%. The consequences of those actions translate into an extraordinary number of lives deaths. You can trace it in terms of the change in lung cancer rates among males, females, African Americans, and others. It is an extraordinary success story, a huge percentage of the progress we've made in reducing cancer-related deaths are directly related to the progress we've made on smoking. And if you think it's just natural, I put this slide up despite the fact that it's old, because everybody always assumes that California, one of the global leaders, always was better than the rest of the world. The reality is, before California started to tackle tobacco, their lung cancer rates were actually higher than the national norm. This only takes us through 2007. But if you were to chart that out now through to today, the difference is even greater. The reality is that what we have done in reducing tobacco use translates directly into lives saved. And the truth is, if we could keep that track up in the United States, it isn't an exaggeration to say that by 2035, we could see smoking as a major cause of disease literally wiped off the map. The United States is not different than the progress we're seeing in the globe. It started later globally in many respects because of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. The Framework Convention on Tobacco Control was ratified and went into effect in 2005. At that time, 58 countries ratified it. Today, we're up to 183 countries. We Americans are humiliated to be among the few that haven't. When you look at the progress that has led to, in 2005, 8 countries had smoke-free air laws. In fact, in 2004, Ireland became the first country to have a smoke-free air law. Today, we have 74 countries, and that number is growing. If you look at changes in how well we're warning people about the health consequences of tobacco use, in 2006, we had 13 countries with pictorial warnings, the most effective warnings, covering 30% of the pack. Today, we have 103 countries with warnings of over 50% of the pack. In 2006, 4 countries had significant advertising bans. Today, that's 66 countries. If you want to look at one region, and we don't do this often enough, the reality is South America is the role model for the world. Today in South America, every single independent country has a comprehensive smoke-free public spaces laws. 10 of the 12 countries now have laws requiring pictorial warnings covering 50%, and 6 of the 12 countries have comprehensive advertising bans. It is no coincidence that we see dramatic change in smoking rates throughout South America. If every other region could mirror South America, what we would see in terms of change throughout the globe is really quite extraordinary. And you see the jump up when you look at the number of countries that have at least one FCTC Empower being the demand reduction portion of FTC. The change between 2007 and 2016 in particular is dramatic, with progress continuing thereafter. How is it translated? Well, what's translated and what's important to realize is that cigarette sales globally were rising dramatically. This actually suppresses it slightly when the FCTC was being negotiated and when it was ratified. They plateaued just 2 years after the ratification. And finally, in 2013, as countries began to adopt these provisions, we see changes in sales rates. It's even greater when you take out China and you realize that globally we've seen a 23% reduction in sales rates during that period of time. It's hard to overstate the impact. 5.6 billion people are covered by at least one of these policies. That translates into more than 35 million lives saved from premature death. And if just the current trends continued, we're on pace to save over 100 million lives by 2050. That is progress of an extraordinary measure. And everybody who has contributed to that should take a step back and feel a sense of pride in what you have done, and what it is a collective thing. What changed? Well, I apologize for the density of this slide, but what changed is what the tobacco control movement is doing, not the tobacco industry. What changed is the tobacco control movement moved from a medical model and the clinical approaches to a model recognizing the power of public policy, public attitudes, and the tobacco control community changed its behavior. I want to emphasize that because it's that change and the need to continue in that role model that is going to be the key to change in the future. We entered the political arena in a way that the tobacco industry had done decades ago. We learned that the power of who frames the issue for the public, who frames the issue for policymakers, not only changes laws, but it changes the attitudes and perceptions that leads to smoking. We entered in the arena of working with the media in the way that the tobacco industry did. In 1953 and 1963, the tobacco industry devised a public relations plan to respond to the science. We didn't. We have now done so, and that we need to keep up that work, recognizing that he who frames the debate wins the war. We recognized that generating sound science was important in terms of documenting the health effects, but we needed sound science in terms of documenting why people were smoking, what it would take to change what people smoked, the political attitudes towards public policies. We needed to match the industry one by one in doing that. And then we needed to realize it wasn't enough to generate sound science. We needed to generate science about how to most effectively communicate that. And then lastly, the things that people were most uncomfortable with in the public health community, doctors used to say, it's not my responsibility to enter the public fray. Well, the answer is yes, it is. And it was using our political muscle that was absolutely essential to doing that. And critically, we recognize that part of that was exposing and countering not just the tobacco industry's propaganda, but framing how the tobacco industry behaved. What it means is that we all talk about a comprehensive policy solutions, but political advocacy requires a comprehensive approach. It requires combining our knowledge and research of the science with population-based solutions, communications to get that information out effectively, development of popular support by the grassroots, because that's where change takes place, a willingness to engage in direct advocacy using all of those tools. And then the two pieces that are often left out, but I want to emphasize because they're critical for us going forward, which is providing legal assistance to support those advocacy efforts, defend them when they're attacked, and to expose the tobacco industry's piece. And a piece that's often left out, which is, while we often say that a small group of dedicated leaders can bring about remarkable change, and that's true, in order to take that to scale across the globe, we need to recognize that sustained broad social change requires financial assistance if we're going to do it. It has been the combination of those things. Each of them are absolutely essential. There's a reason why we've seen change across the globe. This focuses on the Bloomberg Initiative funded grant. Looking at Africa, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grants make a difference. WHO support has made a difference. And in the early days, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was the key catalyst for the change that took place in the United States. We can't forget the importance of continuing to focus on the need for that kind of donor support for the kind of work we're going to do if we're going to keep up the progress that we've made. We have truly bent the arc of public health, and there's core things. We've just demonstrated the power of population change. We've just demonstrated the importance of concrete, evidence-based, proven policy measures. We've demonstrated that when you mobilize civil society, it emboldens government, and the two of them together is an unbreakable force that the tobacco industry can't counter. And we need to learn, and we have learned, that the financial support of folks like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Gates Foundations, the WHO's financial incentives make the difference in the world. But our biggest challenges lie ahead of us, and that's what's critical from my point of view. What we have accomplished is we've begun to move that ball down the hill. We've begun to demonstrate what's possible. The challenge for us now is recognizing what propelled our progress, keeping our eye on the ball, and extending that progress and extending it to everywhere. It is recognizing the value of persistence and perseverance. The battles we have fought have been hard. The battles we need to win will be even harder, but we can win them. There is a risk that after 20 years of fighting this battle, we get tired. The tobacco industry never gets tired. Money is their constant incentive. We can win if we don't stop. We need to recognize it's the industry, it's always been the industry who is the vector of this disease. This industry will never change as long as there is money to be made in addicting citizens across this country, across the globe, during this period of time. They may not set out to kill billions of people, but they don't care when they do. And when we lose sight of that, we lose sight of what's critical to do, that it's important for us to continue to expose that wrongdoing. And as I'll talk about briefly, we need to understand that the concept of harm reduction, when driven by the tobacco industry, is just an euphemism for industry perpetuation. Now, we also need to, and I want to mention this later, to make a transition, and an important transition. We always thought that the best we could do is control the tobacco epidemic. I think what we've accomplished demonstrates that we can do much more. We can make death from tobacco part of the globe's history, not our future. It is not inevitable that tobacco needs to be with us. Now, I want to start out by focusing on the fact that we need to understand that as much success as we've had, both in the United States and as I'll show in the globe, it isn't uniform. And that is incredibly important. Until everybody is protected by tobacco control, our task lies ahead of us. In the United States, the comparison between states that have raised their tobacco taxes and provided smoke-free protection directly relates to the level of smoking rates. So we have states that have done extraordinarily well. We have states where we have made almost no progress whatsoever. When you look at a map of the United States, you see it very starkly. Where you live makes an enormous difference in terms of how much low-income individuals smoke. It's even more stark when you look at it based on race in the United States. What that tells us is that every place where we have worked to reduce, where we've worked to pass laws, we have made a difference. And you see it even more starkly. Here this chart compares states with high taxes, smoke-free air laws with smoking rates. And what it shows is that high-income individuals have dramatically changed their behavior. In states with high tobacco taxes, smoke-free air protection, we have seen dramatic reductions in low income, but not as consistently. But what we also see is in states that don't have high taxes, don't protect their people from smoke-free air laws, don't have consistent tobacco control things, low-income individuals have not changed their behavior whatsoever. It isn't the individuals. It's what government has done or failed to do to protect those individuals. It is very important to realize that the tobacco control policies that we have do in fact work with low-income individuals across the United States and I think across the globe. What we need to be sure is that those policies that make a difference impact individuals wherever they live. Now, globally, this story is the exact same. We are getting closer to meeting WHO's target of a 30% relative reduction by 2025. But the progress is uneven. It's uneven across countries. It's directly related to whether countries have adopted the FCTC Empower provisions or not. And we need to understand that, as we often see in social movements, progress is not consistent. It requires continued work. In fact, today there are 4 fewer countries on track to meet that goal compared to WHO's findings 2 years ago. There's still 6 countries across the globe that are experiencing an increase in tobacco use, and 9 are seeing no significant change. So that what it means is that while we are applauding ourselves for the progress we're making, we have to put our foot on the gas and make sure that that progress continues in those places and is spread to other places. I'm purposely throwing Africa up, and this is just one slide. I could have shown others. What we have seen is the majority of countries in Africa, while they've ratified the FCTC, have not adopted the key Empower progress. And what we also see is that the progress that we've made was significantly greater, and that it's not tailed off, but both because the countries we've worked in where it's easy to make change, we've made them. And the countries where it's harder, we need to continue to talk to ourselves about how we're going to push and make more change. So when you're looking at a country with 2 fully implemented Empower policies, the reality is over the last 2 to 4 years, we haven't made as much progress. It's not because we can't, but because we need to take a step back and ask what it's going to take to succeed in those countries. But we have good examples to show us that we can. And I think that is incredibly important. Mexico is one of those places where I'd like to look, where for years we worked to pass a smoke-free air law and thought we are never going to get over that hump. Well, the reality is in the last 2 years, we have gotten over that hump. What it tells me is that in countries like India, China, Indonesia, and much of Africa, we will succeed if we continue to persist and push that ball forward. There's another lesson that's out here that I think is really important for us to understand. And that is when we stop pushing forward, the industry succeeds in pushing us backward. Several years ago, we looked at Turkey as the role model for the globe. It made more progress in Empower policies than literally any other countries. And then we stopped pushing forward with the same pressure that we had seen before. What did we see? Progress came to a complete standstill and in fact began to reverse. But it's not just like countries like Turkey. There's a universal lesson. Even in the stars across the globe, Australia, Canada, when you look over the 25-year period, there were periods after dramatic progress where people stopped pushing. And when that happened, what we saw was progress stop moving forward. There is a very important lesson to that in every country in which we work. And there's a great illustration for it. A number of years ago, we put together this slide to show about how policy change comes about, the building blocks of policy change. building an environment to support it, supporting sustainable civil society to pass tobacco control laws. What we learned then is when you do that but don't fully implement them. India is my prime example of that. When we came into India in 2007 and 2008, it already had good laws. The problem was most of the people in the country didn't know it, and they hadn't been implemented, so they hadn't had their impact. Then Indian NGOs went to work to make that happen, and we began to see real social change, real attitude change, and prevalence declines. But places like Turkey and others say to us that the real model needs to have two other building blocks on top of it. And that is, once you begin to make progress, the answer isn't to stop. It is to figure out, what do we need to do next? How do we build on that? Is it plain packaging? Is it reinvigorated warning labels? Is it a new law like the tobacco-free generation laws? The reality is we need to be innovating constantly if we're going to get to the point where we're not talking about controlling tobacco, but making tobacco history. And that's a lesson that we can't stop learning if we're going to get to what I think is now a feasible goal with regard to that. We also need to recognize the world's changed, but the tobacco industry not. Did they truly change their behavior? The answer is not for a second. But it's a really important lesson for us to learn. So when we look at countries like Eastern Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa, what do we see? We see real challenges for the tobacco industry. For them, the challenge is, how do we grow those markets? Or as the British American tobacco executive said, we'll sell where it's legal, where we can operate to our own international standards, and where we can make money. Where we see places where progress needs to be made, they see opportunities. 25 years ago, there was a study in Arizona that found that Native Americans in New Mexico, weren't smoking and had lower cancers of cancer and heart disease. The tobacco industry's internal document says that's a marketing opportunity for us. The same is true here about we should not be depressed simply because total free world market appears to be declining. Within the total market, there are areas of strong growth, particularly in Asia and Africa. That's the tobacco industry's attitude. It hasn't changed. The importance of us framing the tobacco industry's wrongdoing. Here's the iconic picture of 7 American CEOs 30 years after the Surgeon General's report saying that smoking is neither addictive nor is it proven to cause disease. Here is the CEO of Philip Morris 4 years later still saying, I don't know if anyone dies from smoking tobacco. I just don't know. Well, if he doesn't know, he's the only one on the planet who doesn't. And we need to remember that it is now 20 years since the U.S. Judge Gladys Kessler found that over the course of the past 50 years, the defendants lied, misrepresented, deceived the American public, including smokers and the young people they avidly sought as replacement smokers. I want to show these slides because they change global perceptions, but that was 20 years ago. 35-year-old individuals were 15 then. Policymakers that in place today don't remember those things. Our job is to remind the public, media, and policymakers that the tobacco industry hasn't changed. If we don't stop doing that, they will find their way back into the halls of decision makers. They will return to the stage where they are considered legitimate stakeholders. They aren't. And it's our job to make sure that we understand that. Harm reduction. How much time have we all spent on harm reduction? We need to remember that harm reduction is not a new issue. Trust us, they have said repeatedly for 50 years. We care about our customers. And each time they tell us this time is different. They say ends are different than low tar, than the other things. What's the lesson? Is when you listen to the tobacco industry, you're going down a black hole designed only to allow them to continue to market their products. It went back to the 1950s, just what the doctor ordered. When you smoke L&M, you draw into your mouth much less nicotine and nitrogenous constituents. It's just a different way of saying the same things they've ever said. 1990s, Omni cigarettes, reduced carcinogens, premium taste. Fool me once, it's our fault. What we have seen is in each and every one of those cases, the tobacco industry already knew that their products weren't safer. But while we think today's debate among the public health community is unique this time, it isn't. 2 Surgeon General's reports actually endorse the concept of reduced exposure to tobacco toxicants. In 1966, the U.S. Public Health Service recommended the progressive reduction of the tar and nicotine content of cigarette smoke. I ran the Federal Trade Commission Tar and Nicotine Laboratory during my limited period of time there. The FTC was convinced to become the tobacco industry's ally in promoting the myth of low-tar cigarettes. The debate was as intense then as it is now. What we need to understand is that the industry's goals have never changed. Market new products not to save lives, but to continue to sell more cigarettes and use it as a smokescreen to hide the fact that they continued to oppose all government regulation to curtail cigarettes. That was the game plan in 1950, 1960, 1970, and 2024. The goal has remained the same. They are a profit-making machine. Their goal is to sell as many addictive products to as many people as they can conceive of doing, and to use new product innovation to define the industry as a respectable part of the solution, not the cause of the problem, and to make the debate about reducing harm, not reducing tobacco use. Is it similar? And what's the goal? The reality is, even if low-tar cigarettes had been safer, they would have been a public health disaster because they were designed with the goal of providing smokers with a choice and a reason not to quit. They were designed to denigrate the importance of the warning labels about cigarettes. They were designed to keep people in the marketplace. And has it changed? Well, here's the 2006 to 2008 Philip Morris game plan. What do these new products do? They give us an opportunity to gain a seat at the table, to enter the discussion about regulation. Having gained a seat at the table, we have a further opportunity to help shape the future of regulation. Their goal is regulation that will allow them to continue to sell products, to be as profitable in the 21st century as they were in the 20th century. They're not a neutral player. They have one goal: addict as many people as they can, sell as many products as they can without regard to the health consequences. And e-cigarettes is no different than that. We saw earlier low-tar cigarettes, considering all I'd heard, I decided to either quit or smoke true. E-cigarettes, why quit? Switch to blue. The playbook is the same. Lure kids with products that have high flavors, hook them with nicotine, make it cool to use those products, and then fight all meaningful regulation with regard to it. Our heated tobacco products, IQOS, are they really any different? Well, look at the advertising and marketing of those products for it. They're doing the same thing with IQOS that tobacco companies have done with e-cigarettes. They're designed to make this the cool product for the 21st century. Yeah, Philip Morris says they want to help smokers quit, but they don't think that the market for cessation is anywhere near big enough to perpetuate their profit-making desires and needs for the 21st century. So we need to recognize the new products are both a threat on their own, but something else that I want to emphasize before I finish, which is they're a threat, as Mike Dobbs said to me, of mass distraction. If we spend all of our time focused on these new products, we forget the importance of continuing to push the traditional tobacco control policies that have made the difference. Higher taxes, smoke-free air awards, more and more effective warning labels, counter-advertising, prohibiting tobacco industry marketing, exposing tobacco industry wrongdoing. We need to be able to balance the two. We need to keep a focus on the policy changes that are necessary while preventing e-cigarettes from becoming both a distraction to ourselves and a way for the tobacco industry to just maintain its profitability for the next group of century. And then last, my last and I think most important point is that it is time to reframe the debate. It is about making tobacco history. But in doing so, I think we need to think about how we go about that and how we frame it. One of the reasons why I'm confident that we can do it is because we've demonstrated that we can do it. If in the United States, smoking rates among kids are at 2 or 1.9% and even lower for daily smoking rates, and they're not dissimilar in Australia these days, what it demonstrates is that contrary to the public perception that the tobacco industry perpetuates, there is nothing inevitable about kids smoking. I was once told that, focusing on kids is a waste of time. The kids do stupid things, and this is among the dumb things they will do. Well, what we've learned is when you eliminate the Marlboro Man, when you eliminate what makes them attractive, if we're smart enough to make sure that they can't use flavors to addict them and make them appealing, and social media to make them cool, then there actually is nothing inevitable about kids starting to smoke. And if we can do it in the United States, and if we can do it in Australia, there is no reason we can't do it everywhere in the globe. But the key there is that if we want to get the world to think that there's nothing inevitable about people smoking, we need to think about how we talk about that. The very first step of every single major public health victory in tobacco control is we have first taken the case to the public so that they understood it beforehand. Getting in front of ourselves with policies that they think are draconian will create a backlash. Getting in front of this and building a base of support for it will allow us to go from talking about tobacco control to a world where everybody agrees. The only reason anybody smokes is there's a bunch of very rich executives running huge, massive corporations that have spent billions of dollars manipulating the public, manipulating their products, and preying on our nations and our globe's children. If we can win that public battle, then there is no policy that's beyond our reach. But our tactics, our strategies need to be politically strategic. We need to bring policymakers along. As long as there's an industry as well, I think it's really important. We need to not kid ourselves. When we think about the end, there isn't an end as long as there's a tobacco industry. We need to continue to make sure that we are educating the public. We need to continue to make sure that we're pushing forward policies that the public supports and that continue to make change. We need to continue to expose the wrongdoing of the tobacco industry. If there's any lesson that we have all learned across the globe outside tobacco, but looking at social movements, is when we think we've won it and we stop, the other side steps in and fills the gap. Our goal should be to make tobacco history, but we shouldn't fool ourselves. There is not a time-limited end to this effort. We will win if we sustain our effort. We will win if we're smart. We'll win if we recognize what got us to where we are today and double those efforts going forward. I want to thank you for the time and the opportunity to do this. I think we truly sit at a critical moment in our globe's history. We talked about the fact that if current trends continue, globally we can save over 100 million lives between now and 2050. But if you think about the fact that the prediction was 1 billion lives this century, 100 million lives is a stepping stone. It's not the end. we need to make sure that that 100 billion is magnified tenfold. We can get there, I'm convinced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Wow. You took us through so much, and I loved how you even framed the title, which is, all the progress that we've made, and then there's still a lot of challenges ahead. I want to start, we have a number of questions lined up, so I'm just going to jump right in. And one of the questions is about, I think, sort of drawing on the really poignant graphs that you showed of smoking rates in the US going down over 25 years, both among adults, among kids, down to, under 2% among kids. Do you have any worries that those rates could increase? I mean, I think you addressed it, but could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the answer to that is absolutely I do. Because I think, the way we have succeeded in reducing that is we've curtailed the tobacco industry's marketing. We've changed social norms in terms of where people use this and who uses it with regard to those issues. We've made smoking uncool with regard to that. So it's no longer a passageway to sexual and social success for an adolescent. If we stop, the industry will do just what it did with e-cigarettes, which is it will create a new image, a new product designed to make it cool. And in some ways, it's even more frightening because while they could manipulate nicotine with cigarettes, it was limited. We have now seen that they have learned how to manipulate nicotine to make it more addictive, more rapidly, more intensely in ways that young people can do. So I actually believe with all my heart that if we stop, if we allow them to have the playing field, we'll see a change, and it'll be dramatic.
Right. And so you mentioned nicotine. One of the issues that the FDA is talking about is reducing nicotine in cigarettes to non-addictive levels. How much of a priority do you think that should be, at least in the US, in terms of folks working on that issue compared to others? We still have, as you showed, states that don't have clean indoor air laws. But how much effort do you think we should put on reducing nicotine?
Well, I think it's important for us to look at a number of innovative ideas if we're going to reach the entire public. In the United States, we have a step before that, which is eliminating menthol, which the tobacco industry has used to target not just the African American community, but the Native American community, the LGBTQ community, and others. We need to demonstrate that we can do that and that we can do that effectively. Then I think we do need to begin to take a look at what those next steps are. And I think the concept of reducing nicotine to non-addictive levels is absolutely critical, but we need to do it right. Early in the year, I was heartened because the Biden administration was talking about combining that effort with a dramatically increased cessation effort to develop a new tobacco cessation framework, to energize that and to do more in low-income communities. I think the idea of reducing nicotine is a very important idea to be explored, but I think we need to be talking to ourselves very thoughtfully about how we combine it with the other activities that need to be done moving forward.
Great. And of course, different countries are in different places.
Well, I think that one of the lessons that I think is really important, and one of the things that I think has been really disturbing about how we've debated globally about the role of e-cigarettes, is we need to recognize that different countries are at very different places. Their governments have different capacity to regulate. The epidemic is at different stages. And what we need to do is design our policy so that each country gets to move through the steps that I think are critical, that have been successful in so many different places. If we jump over them in some places, we'll see a backlash. If we do it right, I think we can move every country down that spectrum with regard to that. Ukraine is a wonderful example. Ukraine, which has had extraordinarily high smoking rates in the worst of times, has continued to make progress with regard to that down to those levels. In the United States, when we started out, if we talked in 1997 about reducing nicotine, it was, a theoretical concept. There was a paper written in 1994 that said it. It didn't make any sense with smoking rates at those levels. Today, we truly can think about doing that, but we need to do it as part of a comprehensive plan.
Yeah. And you talked about the going through those stages and steps. Would you see changes in social norms as a key aspect of that? And or what else might be?
Well, I think changes in social norm is the absolute crucial component of what we do. In the United States, when I look at what our smoking rates are and what our policies are, part of it is driven by the policies that we've adopted. A great deal has happened because we've changed the social norm in the United States through relentless advocacy, fighting these battles. Sometimes when we don't succeed in passing policy, we think we've lost. Many times, I think, as long as we fight the policy in a way that it explains it to the public, that constantly reminds people about the harms of smoking, that constantly reminds people about the behavior of the tobacco industry, we see social norm change. And my hope is, and I think we've experienced this in other countries, we've seen it in India. I'm hoping we're beginning to see it in Indonesia, where the battle itself is helping to change the norm as much as the policies we've changed. And that's the area where, for advocates working on these issues, it's important for you to realize that you're making progress, even if you're not always passing policies as rapidly as you would like, if you're fighting that battle in the public arena, so that there is public debate about it, so that people begin to understand those issues. I think you'll begin to see the change globally that will change that social norm. But then, your first question is, once you've changed social norm, you have to stay at it. Social norms evolve over time. And as long as the tobacco industry can make money off of doing the wrong thing, it's important for us to be out in front of them.
Let me ask you about getting rid of tobacco altogether, making smoking history and tobacco-caused deaths and disease history. We're starting to see polling in this country and other countries where the public is interested in getting rid of tobacco and tobacco sales. And I'm sure you've heard many times over your many decades-long career, why doesn't the government just ban it? The tobacco has no redeeming features. Why can't we just ban it? How do you respond to that? And sort of historically, and then thinking about today and the future.
Well, I think two things. One is, I think we should take solace from the fact that the public conceptually thinks it's a good idea. I think that tells me it's a winnable battle. At the same time, I think we make a mistake if we don't recognize the importance of the education that we have to do to take that simplistic notion and make it one that is deeply held and fully understood. It's easy for the public to do it because, close to 90% of the American public doesn't smoke. But what we've seen, and we've seen it for sure with the battle over menthol cigarettes, and we see it with every major battle, is once that turns into a concrete proposal, it becomes a really strenuous political battle. And if we're going to win that strenuous political battle, I think we need to recognize that polls that show that don't demonstrate the depth of and the intensity of the fight that lies ahead. I think we can win that fight, but we need to do it. We need to make clear a couple things. One is, this is about the heart and minds of kids. And that's where we always win the battle in every country, I should say to you, and make it about kids. It is about making people understand that the only people who benefit from continued smoking is the tobacco industry, and making sure they understand what the tobacco industry does in order to perpetuate it itself. And then third, I think we need to be able to lay out a scenario for people so that they actually believe it is not inevitable that people will smoke. This isn't 1930s alcohol prohibition. I think we can demonstrate to people that if we do the things that society thinks we should do, we can get ourselves to a place where people just won't smoke. And then we need to manage that with regard to it and build the support with that among the very constituents that the tobacco industry will mobilize. The other thing is I think we need to also spend time in the US, we've done this to a degree, is recognize that there are people whose livelihoods depends on tobacco. One of the great changes in the US is when you actually document it, there's new data out there that shows very few farmers in the United States anymore depend on tobacco with regard to it. There are almost no manufacturing jobs. We can make a transition to a society that doesn't have tobacco to cause literally no economic harm to people who we care about. If the CEO of Philip Morris doesn't make millions of dollars, I don't think anyone will care.
Well, thank you, Matt, for this wonderful presentation. You've covered so much ground in a short period of time, and I really appreciate you sharing your viewpoints, your expertise, your experiences today, and your lessons, which are really most important for all of us as we continue the fight. And I do want to personally thank you for everything that you've done throughout your career to fight for public health and to lead the way to make for a tobacco-free future. I also want to thank everyone in the audience today for joining us. You had fantastic questions, although we couldn't get to all of them. I hope you found this to be an inspiring conclusion to this year's Innovations in Tobacco Control lecture series. And we will be back in September with another excellent lineup of guest speakers, so please keep a lookout for more information coming soon. And in the meantime, we invite you to subscribe to the Global Tobacco Control YouTube channel to view previous lectures. So thanks again, Matt. It's so great having you here. And thank you everyone for joining. See you next time.